They said the title Duchess of Sussex was gone forever, buried under controversy, whispers, and shattered royal trust. But tonight, that title lives again, and not in Meghan Markle's hands, but in the hands of the one woman she never imagined would wear it, Zara Tindall. The woman without a title, the one who never wanted a crown, just became the most powerful symbol in the modern monarchy. And it all started with a single stroke of King Charles's pen. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the scene. Buckingham Palace, silent, regal, the weight of centuries pressing on its marble halls. Inside, King Charles sits at his mahogany desk, the same one his mother once used. Before him, a document lies open, its golden seal waiting. His hand trembles slightly, not from age, but from the gravity of what he's about to do. One signature, one decree, and the monarchy itself would change course. And as his pen moves across the parchment, a title long associated with scandal finds new meaning. The Duchess of Sussex. And the world gasps. But here's the real question. Why Zara? Why now? Why would King Charles, a man obsessed with preserving tradition, break royal precedent to bestow a duchess title on someone who's never held one, who never even wanted one? The answer is buried in years of loyalty, sacrifice, and something deeper, a reckoning within the House of Windsor itself. Because this wasn't just a coronation. It was a correction. Let's rewind. The last time the title Duchess of Sussex dominated headlines, it was attached to Meghan Markle, the Hollywood star turned royal rebel. She arrived in the royal family like a breath of modern air. Charming, outspoken, unpredictable. But the fairy tale soured fast. Accusations, leaks, tears, explosive interviews, and finally, an exit that shook the monarchy to its foundations. For King Charles, it wasn't just a family rupture. It was a scar on the institution itself, one that the world never let him forget. And now, years later, he's done something no one saw coming. Not to erase the past, but to rewrite its ending. This story matters because it's not just about titles. It's about redemption, legacy, and what power really means in the modern royal world. It's about two women, one who chased the crown and lost it, and one who ran from it and found herself wearing it anyway. And if you think this is just another royal shuffle, think again. This was personal. From the moment the news broke, Zara Tindall crowned Duchess of Sussex after King Charles signs historic decree. The reaction was instant chaos. Social media exploded. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it cruel. Was it a reward? A punishment? Or something in between? The palace offered no explanation. No press conference. No statement. Just that single decree. But behind the silence, insiders whispered that this decision was years in the making. A plan shaped in the shadow of the late Queen's passing. A decision influenced by secrets no one dared to speak, until now. Let's paint the contrast. Meghan Markle, glamorous, ambitious, armed with charisma and controversy. Zara Tindall, down-to-earth, horse-riding, refreshingly unroyal. One sought the spotlight, the other avoided it. One left the monarchy behind. The other stayed loyal without ever belonging. And yet, fate, or rather, King Charles, decided that Zara, the woman who never wanted a title, should carry the one name that Meghan made infamous. Why? Because sometimes silence speaks louder than speeches. And loyalty is the loudest message of all. But this wasn't a random decision. It wasn't about favoritism or revenge. It was about symbolism. The monarchy has been bleeding credibility for years. Scandals, interviews, and tell-all documentaries have stripped away its mystique. King Charles knows that survival in this new age doesn't come from tradition alone. It comes from trust, from authenticity, from proving that the crown can stand for something pure again. And who better to represent that than the royal family's most grounded, most unshakable figure? Zara and Elizabeth Tindall, daughter of Princess and granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, Olympic medalist, mother of three, and perhaps the last royal who still lives like one of us. Yet even she was stunned when the call came. According to palace insiders, Zara was at her country home when she received the news. The king himself wanted to speak privately. The tone was formal, almost ceremonial. He told her, in his gentle but deliberate way, that he wished to honor her with a duchess title, one that carried history, responsibility, and more than a touch of controversy. Zara, always humble, reportedly laughed in disbelief. "You can't be serious," she said. But he was. The monarch who once watched his niece grow up on the sidelines now wanted her to step into the center of royal history. Think about the irony. For decades, Zara Tindall was known as the royal without a title. Her mother, Princess Anne, famously refused royal titles for her children, wanting them to live freely, away from the suffocating constraints of monarchy. It was seen as a noble choice, a rare act of rebellion that actually preserved dignity. And now, in one of fate's strangest twists, Zara has been given a title more loaded than any other. A title that once symbolized division now stands for reconciliation. A title born in chaos, reborn in grace. But make no mistake, this wasn't a smooth transition. Behind the polished palace photos and official smiles lies a storm. Rumors swirl that not everyone in the royal family supported this move. Some saw it as a direct slight to Meghan. Others worried it would reopen old wounds. Yet King Charles pushed forward, determined to make a statement, not just to his family, but to the world. His decree was about healing, but also about hierarchy. About reminding everyone that the crown decides, not Hollywood, not public opinion, not Netflix narratives. The monarchy may bend, but it does not break. Still, even within royal circles, whispers grew louder. Was this Charles's way of reclaiming the Sussex name from scandal? Or was it his subtle rebuke of those who turned their backs on the family? One thing is certain. Charles has always believed in quiet symbolism. His actions rarely shout, they echo. And this one echoed across continents. Because when the news hit Los Angeles, the reaction was instant. Meghan's friends reportedly reached out in disbelief. Some sources claim she was blindsided. Others say she expected it, that Charles had hinted months ago about reallocating certain titles. But few could have predicted he'd choose Zara. To Meghan's critics, it was poetic justice. To her supporters, it was vindictive politics. And to the monarchy, it was evolution. But what if there's more? What if the decree isn't just a title swap, but part of something larger? A restructuring of the royal family itself. One that redefines who holds influence in the post-Elizabeth era. Think about it. King Charles, nearing the twilight of his reign, preparing to hand the torch to Prince William. But before he does, he wants to correct what he calls unfinished business. The Duchess of Sussex title isn't just symbolic. It's a key piece in how the monarchy wants to be seen moving forward. And Zara Tindall, the reluctant duchess, may be the bridge between the monarchy's troubled past and its uncertain future. Even more intriguing, insiders say the decree included an unusual clause, something unprecedented, a moral succession condition linking future duchess privileges to conduct, service, and public image. In other words, the crown now rewards behavior, not birthright. It's a quiet revolution in royal protocol. And if that's true, Zara's crowning isn't just a personal honor. It's a message to every royal, every watcher, and every critic. The monarchy is rewriting its rules. But here's where it gets personal. For King Charles, this decision was layered with emotion. He's watched his family fracture under global scrutiny. He's seen loyalty tested, love weaponized, and truth twisted for ratings. To him, Zara represented something rare, constancy. The kind of person who does her duty without demanding applause. The kind of royal who still believes in service before self. And that, in Charles's eyes, made her worthy of something even Meghan's popularity couldn't buy: royal forgiveness. So, what does this mean for the monarchy moving forward? For one, it sends a clear signal: loyalty matters again. The old values of discretion, humility, and endurance are being restored. And Zara, the duchess who never asked to be one, becomes the embodiment of that revival. But it also reignites the conversation about who the modern monarchy truly represents. The elites? The public? Or those rare few who can balance both worlds? Because let's face it, Zara's life has always been different. She competes in equestrian events. She drives her kids to school. She jokes on podcasts. She's never hidden behind velvet ropes. That authenticity, that normal royal aura, is exactly what the crown needs right now. A face that softens its image, reminds people of humanity behind the hierarchy. It's strategic, it's emotional, and it's pure Charles. And yet, As cameras flash and the public debates, one haunting question lingers. How will Meghan respond? Will she stay silent? Or strike back with her own version of events? Because history has shown, when the Sussexes are provoked, the world listens. And sources say Meghan is already preparing something big. This story is more than royal drama. It's a reflection of how power adapts, how families fracture and mend, how silence can be louder than scandal. But make no mistake, beneath the polished announcements and ceremonial smiles, there's tension brewing. Not everyone is celebrating. Not everyone agrees. Some say Charles's decree is bold. Others say it's reckless. And yet, for Zara, it's not about politics. It's about family, about honoring the grandmother who believed service was sacred, about proving that grace still has a place in the crown. So, as the cameras zoom in on Zara's serene smile, and the world tries to read her thoughts, remember this: royal titles are never just names. They're stories. And this one, the story of how a woman without a title became the Duchess of Sussex, might just redefine the monarchy forever. They say every royal feud begins with a whisper, but this one began with a glare. It was late. The Balmoral wind howled through the castle's dark corridors, and the royal family had gathered for what was supposed to be a quiet dinner. The Queen had just retired to her private chambers, and the rest of the family lingered, glasses half full, words heavy with tension. No reporters, no cameras, just family. But as history would later show, that night wasn't just dinner. It was a declaration of war. It was the final royal gathering before Meghan and Harry's infamous exit. On the surface, everyone tried to keep the peace. Polite smiles, choreographed laughter. But underneath, boiling resentment. Zara Tindall, known for her easy charm and unflappable calm, sat beside her husband, Mike, quietly observing. Meghan, sitting across the room, barely spoke to anyone. Harry's jaw was tight. Even the staff could sense it. Something was about to break. The tension built like a storm waiting for thunder. And then, it happened. A seemingly harmless comment. One that would set fire to an already fragile peace. Meghan, trying to lighten the mood, had made a remark about how archaic some royal traditions felt. Her tone was playful, but her timing was terrible. The room froze. Princess and looked up sharply. Prince William glanced at his father. King Charles, then still Prince of Wales, gave a measured smile, the kind that said, "Not now." But Zara didn't look away. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed. She leaned forward slightly and said, quietly but clearly, "Tradition isn't a cage, Meghan. It's the reason any of us are still here." The room went silent. Meghan blinked, clearly taken aback. Harry shifted in his chair. No one spoke. For the first time that night, the laughter died completely. The Queen's corgis barked somewhere down the hall, the only sound left in the room. Zara didn't mean to humiliate her. She wasn't one for drama. But in that moment, the unspoken line between loyalty and rebellion had been drawn in the sand. And Meghan, proud and unyielding, wasn't going to let it go. "You talk about loyalty," Meghan said slowly, her voice steady but edged with ice. "But loyalty to what? To silence? To rules written by men centuries ago?" It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. And Zara met it head on. "To something bigger than ourselves," she said. "That's what the crown is. It's not perfect, but it's not supposed to be easy." There was no shouting, no slammed doors. Just two women, one born into the system, one who married into it, staring across an invisible battlefield. Everyone else looked down, pretending to sip wine. Charles cleared his throat. Kate gently touched William's hand under the table. It was one of those moments where everyone knew history had just shifted, but no one dared admit it. Later that evening, as the family dispersed, Meghan left the dining room early. She walked through the corridor, shoulders straight, her heels echoing on the marble floor. Zara followed a few moments later, quietly stepping outside into the Balmoral night. The air was sharp, laced with pine and frost. She could see Meghan's silhouette by the courtyard arch, her phone in hand, her voice low, too low to catch words, but not tone. Sharp, frustrated. Zara didn't interrupt. She wasn't the type to eavesdrop. But she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest, the same one she'd felt during the Queen's roughest years of family scandal. The same quiet dread that said, something's breaking that might never be fixed. When Meghan turned, Their eyes met again, just for a second. Zara nodded politely. Meghan said nothing. She slipped her phone into her coat pocket and walked back inside. And that was the last night they would ever be in the same room again as family. But what no one knew then, not even Zara, was that Charles had seen it all. From the far end of the dining room, he had watched his niece stand firm, not out of pride, but out of principle. Later, when everyone had gone, he reportedly told Camilla, "That girl has more of her grandmother in her than anyone else." And he was right. Zara never spoke of the incident again. Not in interviews. Not to the press. Not even to her closest friends. But in the months that followed, her quiet loyalty became something of a legend within the palace. When Meghan and Harry announced they were stepping back, Zara didn't comment publicly. She didn't defend, didn't condemn. She stayed silent. And somehow, that silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, the world turned Meghan and Harry's exit into a global spectacle. Headlines screamed betrayal, freedom, exile, independence. But inside Buckingham Palace, a different story was unfolding, one of quiet reassessment. King Charles, watching the monarchy weather its most turbulent modern storm, began to think differently about legacy, about who truly represented the values the late Queen had fought to protect. It wasn't about bloodlines anymore. It was about character. And when he thought of character, he didn't think of interviews or Netflix deals. He thought of Zara, the woman who had once stood up for the monarchy without raising her voice. The woman who chose service without seeking credit. The one who, in that silent standoff in Balmoral, had reminded everyone what the crown really stood for. But that night wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was the spark that ignited a series of decisions years in the making. Because what Charles saw in Zara that night, that quiet, unshakable dignity, would later become the foundation of his most controversial decree. Fast forward to the aftermath. Meghan and Harry had left. The interviews aired. The world took sides. Royal staff resigned. The Queen's health quietly declined. And through it all, Zara remained, attending events, supporting her cousins, representing the family without fanfare. Never once did she comment on the Sussex situation. Never once did she trade loyalty for publicity. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke for themselves. There's an old saying among palace staff: the Queen's true heirs are the ones who don't seek her throne. Zara embodied that more than anyone. She worked hard, stayed grounded, and treated her titleless life as freedom, not punishment. But destiny, it seems, has a sense of irony. Because while Meghan was across the ocean, building her empire, King Charles was quietly rebuilding his. And at the heart of his new vision stood Zara, the woman who had defended the institution when it mattered most. That fateful night at Balmoral became more than gossip. It became royal folklore. Some called it the night the monarchy found its moral compass again. Others saw it as the moment Meghan sealed her own exile. Either way, it became clear that Zara's poise under pressure had made an impression no speech or scandal could erase. And years later, when Charles sat down with his advisors to discuss the future of the Sussex title, one name came up again and again: Zara Tindall. The forgotten royal. The quiet one. The one who never asked for anything, and therefore deserved everything. But before that decision would become reality, Zara would have to face her own inner conflict. Because she never wanted a crown. She never wanted to be dragged into the chaos her cousins endured. She'd built a life outside of it. A family, a career, a peace. And now, fate was calling her back into a world she thought she'd escaped. Still, every royal story has its beginning. And for Zara, it all started that cold night in Balmoral, when two women, both strong, both proud, crossed paths under a castle ceiling heavy with history. One walked away furious. The other walked away forgotten. But time has a way of remembering the quiet ones. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. They called her the royal without a crown. The girl who could have been a princess but chose to be free. Zara and Elizabeth Tindall, born into history, raised in humility, and destined, as fate would have it, to redefine what royalty truly means. But before she was crowned Duchess of Sussex, before the world even knew her name beyond the sports pages, Zara was simply the girl who grew up without a title and didn't care. When she was born on a cold May morning in 1981, the palace bells didn't ring. There were no gun salutes, no balcony waves, no media frenzy. Unlike her cousins William and Harry, Zara arrived quietly, and that quiet would become the hallmark of her life. Her mother, Princess Anne, was adamant. Her children would not bear titles. It was a decision that stunned the royal establishment. For centuries, lineage had dictated status. But Anne, with her usual iron will, refused to let her children be bound by royal formality. They should be free to live their own lives, she reportedly told the Queen. And the Queen, after a long pause, agreed. So, Zara was not Princess Zara. She was simply Zara Phillips, a young woman growing up between palaces and paddocks, between royal duty and normal life. No title, no expectation, just a last name and a sense of independence rare in her bloodline. As a child, Zara wasn't interested in tiaras or titles. She preferred the smell of hay over the shine of marble floors. While other royals were being groomed for diplomacy and statecraft, Zara was learning to ride fast. She spent her mornings in the stables and her evenings watching her mother train. She fell in love with horses the way others fall in love with dreams. And that passion would carry her far from palace corridors and closer to destiny than anyone could have predicted. Even as a child, she stood out, not because she tried to, but because she didn't. Zara wasn't obsessed with appearances or decorum. She once famously pierced her tongue in her teenage years, sending royal aides into quiet panic. But the Queen didn't scold her. She laughed. "She's got spirit," Her Majesty said. And that spirit would become Zara's armor. But being the normal royal wasn't always easy. In school, classmates treated her differently. Not quite one of them, not quite above them. She carried the royal surname, but not the royal privilege. Yet, she didn't mind. "I don't want to be treated differently," she told a friend once. And she meant it. Zara never wanted to live in the shadow of Buckingham Palace. She wanted her own light, even if it came from the reflection of the countryside sun. As she grew, so did her confidence. Equestrian competitions became her stage. By her 20s, she wasn't just another royal relative. She was an athlete. A fierce competitor who didn't rely on status to open doors. She earned her medals the hard way, through mud, sweat, and falls that left scars. And yet, every time she got back up, the world saw what few royals had ever shown before: resilience without entitlement. She once fell off her horse during a major event in front of thousands, landing hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Cameras flashed, reporters gasped. But instead of tears or embarrassment, Zara got up, dusted herself off, and waved. "That's part of the job," she laughed later. That single moment captured her essence: grace without grandeur. Her success wasn't symbolic, it was real. She won gold at the European Eventing Championships and a silver at the London 2012 Olympics. For a woman with no title, her accomplishments echoed louder than any royal decree. She had carved her identity not from royal privilege, but from perseverance. Still, the irony was inescapable. The woman who had been denied a title became one of the most respected faces of the royal family. She didn't need a crown to shine, and maybe that's what made her shine brighter. But let's not romanticize it too much. Behind that grounded exterior, Zara carried her own quiet struggles. She saw the toll royal life took on her cousins. She saw how William and Harry grew under the spotlight, one destined for the throne, the other destined to walk in its shadow. She saw her uncle, now King Charles, wrestle with duty and emotion. She saw her grandmother carry the weight of an empire with poise, even as her own family crumbled under scandal after scandal. And through it all, Zara stayed on the periphery, watching, learning, surviving. She understood something most didn't: freedom comes at a price. While her cousins were shielded by royal privilege, Zara had to navigate a world where her surname opened doors, but her lack of title closed others. Sponsors hesitated. Journalists pried. Some called her the invisible royal, others the irrelevant one. But Zara didn't care. She was building something no tabloid could measure: respect. And respect, unlike fame, doesn't fade. She married Mike Tindall in 2011, a man who, like her, came from hard work, not headlines. A rugby player, a man with broken bones, not polished shoes. Together, they became the picture of understated happiness. No royal heirs, no scandals. Just two people in love, living in the countryside, raising their children away from the circus. When the press called them the most normal royals, Mike joked, "We just pay our bills and get on with it." It was that kind of humor, honest, unfiltered, that made them relatable. But here's the twist. The very normality that made Zara an outsider to some made her indispensable to others, especially King Charles. He admired her balance, her loyalty, her lack of drama. She didn't crave the stage, but when duty called, she answered. She attended events without complaint, represented the family without controversy, and, most importantly, stayed silent when silence mattered most. That silence would become her greatest strength in the years to come. Because as Meghan Markle's royal story turned into a global spectacle, Zara's quiet dignity became a mirror image of everything the crown wished to be. While Meghan's interviews ignited debates about racism, power, and hierarchy, Zara's presence reminded the world that there were still royals who served without shouting. That contrast, the glamorous duchess who walked away and the humble equestrian who stayed, would one day lead to a choice that changed history. But even before that fateful decree, there were signs, subtle ones, that the palace viewed Zara differently. During Queen Elizabeth's final years, insiders say the monarch often invited Zara for tea, just the two of them. No titles, no staff, no protocol, just grandmother and granddaughter. They would talk about horses, the weather, and sometimes the future of the monarchy. The Queen once reportedly said, "You have what the crown needs, and what it's forgotten." Zara never asked what that meant. But years later, when King Charles made his decision, those words would come rushing back. And yet, for all her strength, Zara remained modest about her place in the royal family. "I'm just doing my thing," she once said in an interview. "I'm lucky to do what I love." But destiny, it seems, has a sense of humor. Because the woman who defined herself by independence would soon become the monarchy's most unexpected symbol of continuity. Zara's story is full of contradictions, and that's what makes it compelling. She's royal, but not royal. Privileged, but relatable. Visible, but unseen. A woman who never fought for attention, yet ended up earning the one title the world thought would never be reassigned. But what made King Charles look past generations of tradition to crown her Duchess of Sussex wasn't luck, it was legacy. Because deep down, Charles saw in Zara something that reminded him of his mother, a steadiness, a sense of duty that didn't need validation. And more than that, he saw a reflection of the monarchy he wished to restore, quiet strength over noisy self-promotion. In an age where scandal sells, Zara represented something priceless, credibility. But fate always waits in the shadows. And for Zara, the moment she was chosen would not come in triumph, but in tragedy. Because the path to her new title began not with a coronation, but with a death. The death of the woman who saw her potential long before anyone else. The Queen's passing shattered the family. It ended an era, and with it, the unspoken balance that held everything together. Suddenly, every royal was being measured. Who would rise? Who would fade? Who could carry the torch forward? In those silent days after the funeral, Charles began to make a list. Not of successors, but of survivors. The ones who could steady the monarchy's image when everything else was falling apart. And at the top of that list, not William, not Kate, not even Anne, was Zara. Because sometimes, the crown doesn't seek the loudest air. It seeks the quietest heart. Zara Tindall had never chased titles. But destiny was about to hand her one that carried both history and controversy. And when the king's pen met paper, it wasn't just Zara's life that changed, it was the monarchy itself. But before that historic decree would reach the world, another royal story had to end, and it wasn't Zara's. It was Meghan's. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Once upon a time, she was the crown's brightest promise. The woman who could have rewritten the monarchy's image forever. Meghan Markle, actress, activist, duchess, and, eventually, exile. Her entrance into the royal family was cinematic. Her exit was catastrophic. And though she didn't know it at the time, the title she once wore with pride, Duchess of Sussex, would one day belong to the one woman she underestimated most, Zara Tindall. The story of the Duchess who lost her crown doesn't begin with betrayal or ambition. It begins with belief. Belief in fairy tales, in change, in the idea that love could fix 1,000 years of history. When Meghan first appeared beside Prince Harry, the world wanted to believe it too. The media framed her as the symbol of a new monarchy, modern, diverse, unafraid to challenge convention. For a moment, even Buckingham Palace seemed willing to embrace that narrative. But fairy tales, especially royal ones, have a habit of cracking under pressure. At first, it was magic. Their wedding, a global spectacle of romance and reform, promised a bridge between the old and the new. American glamour met British tradition. The choir sang with soulful harmonies that echoed change through St. George's Chapel. The Queen smiled, the crowd wept, and the world cheered for the birth of the Sussex era. For a fleeting season, it looked like the monarchy had found its heartbeat again. Then came the whispers. Small at first. Anonymous sources. Tabloid hints. A rumor about Meghan's behavior with staff. A story about tension with Kate. The headlines multiplied, each one sharper than the last. Duchess difficult. Royal rifts. Palace panic. The same press that had once crowned her the future of the monarchy now turned its cameras into weapons. And behind palace walls, that pressure began to split the seams. Some say Meghan underestimated the institution. Others say the institution underestimated her. The truth? They both underestimated each other. The monarchy isn't just a family, it's a system. A centuries-old machine built on secrecy, image, and hierarchy. Meghan, used to the Hollywood model of authenticity and exposure, found herself suffocating in a place where silence wasn't just preferred, it was law. And that silence, to her, felt like betrayal. But for the royals, her outspokenness felt like something else, rebellion. She wasn't wrong to feel cornered, nor were they wrong to feel threatened. That was the tragedy of it all. Both sides wanted to protect themselves, and in doing so, they destroyed each other. As Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, the world split in two. Half saw a brave couple breaking free from an archaic system. The other half saw deserters abandoning duty for dollars. And in the middle of that storm, one truth stood unshakable. The monarchy had been wounded. The title Duchess of Sussex became synonymous not with service, but with scandal. The Queen tried to hold the balance. Her public statements were calm, forgiving, restrained. But inside, the palace was divided. Charles was hurt, not just as a father, but as a future king. William was furious, his trust shattered, and said little, but her silence spoke volumes. And somewhere among them, Zara, the quiet cousin, watched the fallout unfold, not with judgment, but with sorrow. She knew what this meant. Once a title is stained, it rarely recovers. The months that followed were chaos. The Oprah interview, the tears, the allegations of racism, the global backlash, the truth bombs that detonated across every screen. Each new revelation eroded the fragile bridge between Meghan and the institution she once vowed to modernize. And when the Queen stripped them of royal duties, it wasn't out of spite. It was damage control. Yet, even then, something remarkable happened. Zara didn't speak, didn't tweet, didn't hint. While the entire world was picking sides, she chose none. She attended royal events as usual, standing beside family members who had aged 10 years in a few months. Her calm presence became a silent reassurance that not everything in the monarchy was broken. She represented the stability that Meghan's departure had taken with her. It was during those turbulent days that Charles began to rethink what titles meant. He'd grown up surrounded by pomp and power, but now, watching it all implode under the weight of modern scrutiny, he realized something. The future of the crown wouldn't be saved by popularity, it would be saved by principle. He once told an aide, "The crown must belong to those who serve, not those who shine." And that was the moment the idea was born. The idea that one day, the title of Duchess of Sussex could be restored, not as a punishment to Meghan, but as a redemption for what it once stood for. Still, Meghan's departure wasn't just a personal loss. It was an institutional earthquake. It forced the monarchy to look in the mirror and confront the cracks it had ignored for decades. The image of a diverse, modern, inclusive crown had been shattered, and in its place stood an uncomfortable truth. Change without understanding only leads to chaos. Meanwhile, in California, Meghan was building a new world. Luxury homes, podcast deals, production companies. But even surrounded by success, she couldn't escape the shadow of the title she'd left behind. Duchess of Sussex followed her everywhere, in headlines, introductions, even lawsuits. It was no longer an honorific. It was a reminder of what she'd walked away from, and what she could never reclaim. For King Charles, the title's exile mirrored his own family's pain. The word Sussex had once symbolized unity, love, and renewal. Now it was a scar. But Charles wasn't one to let scars define him. He'd spent his life trying to heal divisions between Diana and the institution, between tradition and progress, between duty and humanity. And now, as king, he had one last chance to make it right. He began quietly discussing with advisors the symbolic reassignment of royal titles, a move meant to honor service and loyalty over hierarchy. At first, the idea was dismissed. Too radical, too emotional. But Charles persisted. He believed that a monarchy built on symbolism could only survive if its symbols meant something. And that's where Zara came in. When he looked across his family, Charles saw princes and princesses burdened by expectation. But Zara? She was different. Untitled, unentitled, and yet undeniably royal. She had the respect of the public, the approval of the Queen's old confidants, and the quiet strength that mirrored his mother's. Giving her the title of Duchess of Sussex, he thought, could cleanse the wound that had never healed. It was a poetic decision, and a deeply personal one. Still, before he made it official, Charles needed to be certain. He revisited old memories, Meghan's first meetings, her charm, her ambition, her collapse. He read the press clippings, the interview transcripts, the reports of staff resignations. He saw not a villain, but a cautionary tale. The Duchess of Sussex had once been a symbol of modernity, but she became a lesson in humility. And Charles was determined to ensure that title would never again be associated with chaos. In private, some advisors urged him not to reopen old wounds. "Your Majesty," one aide reportedly said, "it will look vindictive." But Charles shook his head. "No," he replied, "it will look like rebirth." And that's exactly what it became, a resurrection. Because when the title left Meghan's hands, it didn't die. It simply waited for the right bearer, the right story, the right heart to carry it with meaning again. But here's where irony makes history interesting. The woman who once symbolized royal rebellion paved the way for the woman who symbolized royal redemption. Meghan's fall didn't destroy the Duchess title, it purified it. It stripped it of glamour and gave it weight. It reminded the world that a crown means nothing without character. For Zara, that lesson would soon define her destiny. But for Meghan, it was the beginning of an exile that would haunt her every move. The world that once adored her now washed with skepticism. Every speech, every project, every photograph was dissected through the lens of what she had lost. She was no longer the royal rebel rewriting the rules. She was the cautionary figure proving that no one is bigger than the institution. And for the monarchy, the message was clear: loyalty lasts longer than headlines. When the historic decree was finally drafted, the one that would grant Zara the title of Duchess of Sussex, Charles reportedly spent hours choosing his words. He didn't want it to sound punitive. He wanted it to sound hopeful. The decree spoke of continuity through service and the preservation of honor through humility. Words that seemed simple, but to those who understood, carried a hidden meaning, a royal correction. The public wouldn't know it yet, not until the announcement would break months later. But within the walls of Buckingham Palace, everyone could feel it. The winds were shifting. The Duchess title that once divided the world would soon unite it under a new name. And the person at the center of it all, Zara Tindall, had no idea what was coming. Because even as Charles planned his boldest move yet, Zara was blissfully unaware. She was at a charity event, smiling, shaking hands, laughing about muddy horses and children's school projects. To her, life was simple. She had no idea that a royal decree with her name on it was being finalized in a gilded office just a few miles away. And that decree, signed in ink, sealed in gold, would soon land in her hands, shattering the peace she'd worked her entire life to build. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began in silence, as most royal crises do. The kind of silence that hums behind heavy doors, where the air itself feels watchful. Inside Clarence's house, King Charles sat alone, a cup of tea untouched beside a stack of papers. The world saw a monarch poised and confident, but the man behind the crown was wrestling with ghosts. The Queen was gone, the family fractured, the public's trust fragile as glass. And one question weighed heavier than all the others. What does it mean to be royal now? For decades, Charles had prepared for this throne. He'd studied diplomacy, tradition, the dance between duty and emotion. But nothing could have prepared him for the world he inherited, one that no longer bowed easily, one that questioned every crown, every title, every penny. The monarchy had always survived by staying quiet. Now silence sounded like guilt. The Meghan and Harry saga had done more than embarrass the institution. It had stripped away its mystery. The palace that once symbolized timeless grace now looked like a family at war. Private grievances had gone public. Personal wounds had become headlines. Charles had spent years trying to modernize the monarchy, but not like this. The House of Windsor was being rebuilt in the eyes of the world, and every move he made mattered. So when the idea of reassessing titles surfaced, quietly, cautiously, he didn't dismiss it. Because deep down, he knew symbols mattered. And the Duchess of Sussex title had become one of the monarchy's most painful symbols of failure. It represented what happens when love and loyalty collide, when personal truth clashes with institutional restraint. It wasn't just a name, it was a scar. The king didn't want revenge. He wanted restoration. But how do you heal a wound that everyone keeps reopening? He thought of his mother. The late queen had always believed in endurance. Never complain, never explain. But the world had changed. The old rules no longer worked. Scandal moved faster than diplomacy now. Charles knew that if he wanted to preserve what his mother built, he couldn't just endure. He had to evolve. And that evolution required courage, and a decision no monarch before him had dared to make. He began reading through royal decrees dating back centuries. Each one elegant, meticulous, formal, and utterly outdated. Titles were once rewards for birthright, not behavior. Nobility was inherited, not earned. But the king saw an opportunity to change that, to make the crown mean something again. He began drafting a new kind of royal decree, one that would reframe honor around service, integrity, and loyalty. And in the quiet margins of that document, one title stood out: Duchess of Sussex. He knew the risk. Restoring the title could reignite every controversy he'd worked to bury. The press would feast. Meghan's supporters would rage. Harry might never forgive him. But leaving it dormant meant letting scandal define it forever. Charles hated unfinished stories, and this one needed an ending. That's when his thoughts turned to Zara. He'd watched her all her life. The granddaughter who grew up free from titles, who carried herself with grace and grit. She didn't chase cameras or headlines. She didn't posture for attention. She simply lived with quiet dignity, the way his mother always had. Zara was the kind of royal the public didn't fear or envy. They liked her. They trusted her. She was everything the monarchy needed to be again. And in her, Charles saw a mirror, not of himself, but of the monarchy's best version. Still, the dilemma was enormous. This wasn't a ceremonial choice. It was political, emotional, symbolic. To take a title once associated with Meghan Markle and give it to another woman, even one as beloved as Zara, would send shockwaves around the world. Some would call it cruel, others courageous. Either way, it would define his reign. The king called for his closest advisors. The meeting was small: 3 men, 1 woman, and a fire crackling in the corner. He outlined his plan: to issue a historic decree of restoration and reassignment, honoring individuals whose loyalty embodied the monarchy's true spirit. The Duchess of Sussex title, he proposed, would be re-established, not erased, not revoked, but redeemed. There was silence, then a cough, then the first objection. "Your Majesty," one advisor said cautiously, "the optics might be disastrous. It could be perceived as punishment. Retribution." Charles sighed. "It's not punishment," he said. "It's preservation." Another advisor leaned forward. "Forgive me, sire, but Zara has never sought a title. Would she even accept one?" The king smiled faintly. "She'll resist. That's precisely why she deserves it." The conversation turned heated. Political analysts would dissect this move for years. The king knew it. But he wasn't thinking like a politician. He was thinking like a father, a son, and a leader of something older than politics, an institution built on legacy. To him, the monarchy wasn't about power. It was about promise. And that promise had been broken. As the meeting stretched late into the night, the king's resolve hardened. He dismissed the room with a quiet wave and sat back, staring at the firelight dancing across the gold frame of his mother's portrait. "You'd know what to do," he murmured to her image. "You always did." For a long time, he just sat there, listening to the crackle, the clock ticking, the weight of the crown pressing invisibly against his thoughts. He knew history wouldn't forgive him easily. It never had. But sometimes, history needed to be rewritten. He reached for his pen. Across town, the city slept, unaware that in one royal study, the future of the monarchy was being decided. Charles began to write, slowly, deliberately. His handwriting was steady, each word chosen with the precision of a man who understood that every syllable would be studied for centuries. To restore the dignity of service and the honor of the title, the Crown hereby reassigns the designation Duchess of Sussex to Her Royal Highness Zara and Elizabeth Tindall, whose lifelong devotion, humility, and integrity exemplify the enduring values of the British monarchy. He paused. "Read it again." Then added one more line, a line that would become legendary. "Let it be known that nobility is not born of privilege, but of character." When he finished, he set the pen down and exhaled. The decision was made. But the dilemma hadn't vanished. It had only changed form. Now, it wasn't whether he should sign it. It was whether Zara would accept it. He knew her well enough to predict her reaction. Zara had never wanted a royal title. She loved her independence. She relished being able to walk into a grocery store without flashing lights or bodyguards. She could live quietly, raise her kids, ride her horses, and escape the royal noise that swallowed so many of her relatives. This decree would destroy that peace. But it would also immortalize her as the symbol of something far greater, the rebirth of royal integrity. Charles wasn't sure if he had the right to ask that of her. And yet, as he folded the parchment and sealed it with the royal crest, he felt a strange calm. For the first time since the Queen's passing, he felt like he was moving towards something, not running from it. This was his decision, his legacy, his moment to redefine the crown. But the world beyond Clarence House was changing fast. The press had caught wind of a historic royal decree in progress. Rumors spread like wildfire. Is King Charles rewriting titles? Will Meghan lose her Duchess status officially? Who will inherit the Sussex crown? Every headline speculated, every pundit guessed. The palace refused comment. The mystery grew, and with every rumor, Charles's anxiety deepened. Not because he feared backlash, but because he feared what this would do to his family. Would Harry see this as betrayal? Would Meghan? Would Zara even forgive him for thrusting her into this storm? That was the king's true dilemma, not the politics, but the personal fallout. Every royal decision has two sides, the public and the private. And this one was as personal as it was political. He stayed awake that night, long after the palace lights dimmed. Somewhere down the hall, Camilla slept soundly. Outside, the city hummed softly under the fog. Charles walked to the window, staring at the horizon over the Thames. The skyline flickered with light, London's pulse, restless and alive. He whispered to himself, the crown must stand for something again. And in that moment, he knew there was no turning back. By dawn, the ink was dry. The decree was sealed. The palace courier stood waiting, unaware of the storm he would soon deliver to Zara Tindall's door. But before the king could rest, he scribbled a final note at the bottom of the parchment. Just 5 words, meant for Zara's eyes only. For service, not for show. Then he folded the page, pressed the royal seal into the wax, and handed it to his aide. Hours later, as the car carrying the sealed decree rolled quietly through the morning mist toward Gatcombe Park, Charles stood by the window of Clarence House, watching it disappear into the distance. He didn't know it yet, but with that single decision, he had set in motion a chain of events that would shake the monarchy's foundations and unite it in ways no one could have predicted. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Not every royal meeting is polite. In fact, the most important ones rarely are. Clarence House had always been a place of quiet power, where decisions made in shadow rippled across the globe. And this particular afternoon, the air inside felt thick with tension, anticipation, and the faint scent of polished wood and old leather. King Charles had called together a select group of advisors, lawyers, and palace insiders. A room so small it could barely contain the magnitude of what they were about to discuss. The subject was delicate. The Duchess of Sussex title had long been dormant, overshadowed by scandal, and charged with controversy. And yet Charles was determined it would not remain tainted. It would be reassigned, not casually, but with intention, and not to just anyone. The quiet woman who had always lived on the periphery of royal drama, Zara Tindall, was the choice. The meeting began as most royal strategy sessions do, with caution, with measured words, and with layers of legalese. Advisors spoke carefully, each sentence weighed against centuries of tradition. The king listened, occasionally sipping from a porcelain teacup, the steam curling toward his face like a crown of its own. He had anticipated resistance. He expected it, but nothing could deter his purpose. "Your Majesty," one advisor began, "reassigning a title that was once held publicly is unprecedented. There will be scrutiny, intense scrutiny. Are you certain Zara is willing to accept?" Charles set down his cup. "I am certain," he said quietly. "She has the integrity to uphold it, and the humility to wear it responsibly." Another advisor leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "The optics, sire. This could be interpreted as a direct message to the Sussexes. Some will see it as retribution." Charles shook his head. "It is not retribution. It is restoration. Titles are not inherited automatically, nor are they a reward for celebrity. They are an acknowledgement of service and character. Zara embodies both." The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Precedent mattered. Scandal mattered. Public perception mattered more than anything. Yet the king remained unwavering. He outlined his vision, a new approach to titles. Not rewards for ambition, but recognition for loyalty, discretion, and duty. And then the conversation shifted to the Sussexes. The room collectively held its breath. "Your Majesty," one aide ventured, "how do you plan to frame this publicly? The media will attack. Meghan will react. Harry may object." Charles tapped his fingers on the table, his gaze distant. "We control the narrative. We present the facts. A title reassigned based on merit. Not punishment. Not envy. Merit. That is what the monarchy stands for, and that is what must be conveyed." For a moment, silence fell. The only sound was the faint ticking of a clock on the far wall. It was a quiet reminder of history passing, decisions being made that would outlive them all. And then Zara's name surfaced again. "She has always shunned titles, Your Majesty. She may refuse," a senior aide warned. Charles leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Her refusal would not diminish the title. It would affirm her humility. That is precisely why she is the rightful choice. The monarchy needs an example, a model that embodies restraint and duty. She is that model." The room fell silent once more. It was the kind of pause where every advisor realized the king's mind was set. He wasn't persuading them. He was informing them. Decisions were no longer negotiable. But Charles's concern wasn't just procedural. It was deeply personal. He reflected on the Queen's passing, the fragility of the family unit, and the fractures caused by Meghan and Harry's departure. The monarchy's image had been battered, but its foundation, the lineage, the responsibility, the centuries of tradition, remained intact. It just needed a symbol strong enough to carry it forward. Zara Tindall, the woman who never sought glory, would become that symbol. The discussion then turned to logistics. How would Zara be informed? What legal language should be included in the decree? How could the palace ensure her privacy while maintaining transparency? Each question was dissected, debated, and recorded meticulously. Even minor wording changes were debated for hours. Every line mattered. Every syllable could affect public perception, familial relations, and historical record. During a break, Charles walked toward the window, staring out at the misty gardens below. He thought of Meghan, the glamour, the controversy, the chaos. And then he thought of Zara, steadfast, reliable, unflinching. A quiet smile touched his lips. This wasn't just a decision, it was a statement. It was a declaration that the monarchy could reward virtue, not just visibility. Returning to the table, Charles began reading aloud from the draft decree. Each word was deliberate, each sentence heavy with meaning. The title would be reassigned with the explicit purpose of honoring loyalty and service, a moral compass for a monarchy shaken by modern scrutiny. Legal clauses were added to ensure clarity, precedence was meticulously cited, and the language was carefully crafted to withstand public and familial examination. As the session drew on, advisors began to nod in cautious agreement. The king's resolve was unwavering. He had chosen not the popular path, but the right one. a decision that would echo through generations. Then came the final obstacle, the private conversation with Zara herself. Everyone in the room knew this was the moment that could make or break the plan. Would she accept? Would she see the weight of the responsibility? Or would her humility compel her to refuse, as she had done countless times in her life? Charles considered it quietly. He didn't want coercion. He wanted consent, informed, voluntary, and grounded in understanding. Zara was not a pawn. She was the future, and he needed her to see that, even if the world did not. The meeting ended with a final directive. The decree was to be signed, sealed, and delivered. Advisors left the room, each understanding the historical significance of what they'd just been part of. The king remained seated, reflecting on the path ahead. He knew that the announcement would create headlines, debates, and perhaps controversy. But he also knew something more profound. A legacy could be restored. Outside, the London fog rolled over the city. The palace walls seemed to hum with anticipation. The press would not know for weeks. Zara would not know for hours. But inside Clarence House, history had already been written, inked carefully, sealed decisively, and guided by a monarch determined to redefine tradition. And as Charles finally rose from his chair, stretching the stiffness from long hours of contemplation, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had navigated the dilemma, balanced duty with morality, and positioned the monarchy for a future built on principle rather than spectacle. But there was one truth he could not control: how Zara would react. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Zara Tindall had never sought the spotlight, never desired the pomp or privilege of royalty. To her, titles were burdens, not blessings. She was happiest on horseback, in muddy boots, the wind whipping across her face, her children chasing after her with laughter echoing through the countryside. And now, out of nowhere, she was being offered the very title that had become a lightning rod for scandal: Duchess of Sussex. When the courier arrived at Gatcombe Park carrying the sealed decree from Clarence House, Zara didn't know what to expect. She opened the envelope carefully, noting the wax seal embossed with the royal crest. Her heart beat faster, not with excitement, but with apprehension. Titles were not trifles. They came with expectations, scrutiny, and responsibilities far beyond what most people could imagine. And she had spent her life deliberately avoiding those complications. She read the words slowly. To restore the dignity of service and the honor of the title, the Crown hereby reassigns the designation Duchess of Sussex to Her Royal Highness Zara and Elizabeth Tindall. Her first reaction was disbelief. She stared at the paper, blinked, and set it down. She laughed nervously, a mixture of amusement and anxiety. "Surely they don't mean me," she muttered. But the weight of it was real. Every word on that decree was deliberate, calculated, and historically significant. Zara understood immediately the implications. Accepting the title would mean stepping into a spotlight she had never sought. It would mean aligning herself with the crown in a way that would invite public scrutiny, media frenzy, and, undoubtedly, backlash from Meghan's supporters. Her mind raced. Could she do it? Could she accept the responsibility without compromising her sense of self, her family, or the life she had built? Zara had spent her life balancing the world of royalty with the world of normalcy. She had ridden horses, won medals, raised her children, and avoided drama. Could she navigate this new chapter without losing herself in the process? Her husband, Mike, noticed her hesitation. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Zara handed him the decree. He read it silently, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose congratulations are in order, though I can see why you're hesitant." Hesitation wasn't just personal, it was principled. Zara had watched her family endure public humiliation, scandals, and media attacks. She had witnessed Meghan's meteoric rise and subsequent fall, and she understood that titles could be as much a curse as a blessing. Accepting the Duchess title meant entering a world she had intentionally kept at a distance. And yet, deep down, Zara understood the significance. This wasn't just about prestige. This was about service, about representing the monarchy in a time when public trust was fragile. It was about embodying values her grandmother had instilled: humility, duty, and integrity. In many ways, this was a calling, not an honor. But Zara's instinct was to resist. She loved her freedom too much. She loved the quiet life she had created with Mike and their children. Accepting the title would uproot that life, placing her under the constant gaze of the world. It would mean cameras in every corner, scrutiny of every action, and commentary on every decision. And she had worked too hard to protect her children from that world to willingly invite it in. She thought back to her childhood, the time she had ridden for hours, escaping the confines of the palace. The years she had spent earning her medals through sweat and perseverance, proving that achievement did not require status. Titles had never motivated her. And yet, here was a decree that offered one of the most prestigious titles in the monarchy, one that carried not just fame, but historical weight. Could she reject it? Could she honor her own principles while refusing the monarchy's highest call to service? Zara sat quietly, the decree in her hands, the autumn light casting shadows across her desk. She considered every angle, every potential consequence. Accepting the title would make her a symbol of stability, of loyalty, of integrity. But it would also make her a target. Public scrutiny, comparisons to Meghan, and endless media speculation. All of it would follow her like a shadow. Mike placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, we'll manage it together," he said. "You've never been about titles, but maybe this is your chance to do something bigger than yourself." Zara exhaled slowly. She knew he was right. This was bigger than prestige. It was about legacy, about correcting a narrative, about offering the monarchy a face that could restore public confidence. She understood that King Charles hadn't chosen her lightly. He had observed her entire life, seen her loyalty, her discretion, and her unwavering commitment to her family and her responsibilities.